Welcome inside the Mountain West Network studio. Time to start digging deep into Mountain West men's basketball with our analyst Andy Glockner joining us each week here inside the Mountain West Network studio to tip off our coverage of the sport. Before we dive into some of the big topics in the Mountain West, let's get you caught up on the standings as of January 5th. Wyoming pacing the field. They're 2-0 in conference play, as is New Mexico and Utah State. Wyoming 13-2 overall. Nevada's 1-0 in conference play. Colorado State, San Diego State, Fresno State, all 1-1 inside Mountain West. UNLV has played one conference game thus far. They're 0-1. And Boise State, Air Force, and San Jose State all 0-2. Let's dive into some of the big topics inside the Mountain West. Let's start with Colorado State. 14-1. They are 1-1 in conference play, off to the best start in school history, which included winning the Great Alaska Shootout. Now, this is a program that's been to the NCAA tournament a couple times here in recent past. How does this team, through 15 games, compare to those teams who had a great deal of success?
Record really impressive. Probably not as intimidating as the team that had Colton Iverson, big 7-foot rim protector, physical rebounding type. This team is a lot more limited defensively. They don't have that type of rim protection. They don't have that type of size, honestly. J.J. Avila, tall but not necessarily physically imposing or active like that around the rim. The rest of the front court a little bit undersized by that standard. So it's really a team that's being carried offensively this year. The game at New Mexico, always a tough place to play, no matter whether the Lobos are a contender or maybe a second-tier team that at least I expected them to be this season. But this had been coming for a little while for Colorado State. The record was flattering to deceive a little bit. Their RPI is somewhere in the teens. If you look at Ken Pomeroy, they're the 60th best team in the country based on their performance and the margins of victory and that type of stuff. So I wasn't necessarily surprised that they picked up their first loss of the season in Albuquerque. The margin and the way it happened was maybe a little bit more disturbing if you're a Rams fan.
You got the win at the Great Alaska Shootout. Had a couple of good road wins at New Mexico State and Colorado. They're at home this week to tip off what could be one of the games of the year in the Mountain West, a game that you're going to call against the University of Wyoming, who themselves are off to a fantastic start at 2-0 in conference play for the first time since 06-07. They got the border war coming up. This is a team that's leaning heavily on senior leadership, a big reason that they've had success out of the gates.
Yeah, it always helps. I mean, what helps more than senior leadership, though, is talented senior leadership. And obviously, they have arguably the best player in the league, but it's more than Larry Nance Jr. up there. This is a better team than I think a lot of people, especially outside this region, gave credit for. I thought before the league season started, based on everything I saw, based on their health, based on how well they were playing, based on how well Larry Shiat has them disciplined, the way the style they're playing, which is always very difficult, their home court advantage in Laramie at 7,200 feet, very tough for teams, especially like a San Diego State coming in from the coast, very hard to adjust to. I think Wyoming can win the league. And I don't think that's a crazy statement to make. Now, I'm not saying they are definitively the favorite. I think you still have to look at San Diego State. I think Colorado State, obviously. I think you have to look at UNLV. You have to look at New Mexico even, is in position to do some things in the league this year. But given the amount of talent they have, given the style of play that they're comfortable with, that a lot of other teams are not comfortable playing that way, and given their relative health, which is funny because Larry Nance was the big question mark, in the preseason. Now Wyoming is the healthy team, probably playing the best on both ends of the court right now. It would not surprise me to see Wyoming go into Fort Collins and win this game this week, and it would not surprise me if at the end of the season the Cowboys were at least a share of the championship.
That you'll be on the call for Campus Insiders. Handicap this game for us. What do you expect out of these two rivals?
I think it's going to be a good game. I think it's one of those games, you know how this works in league play. The team that needs to win the game often wins the game. And right now, Colorado State needs to win this game. You don't want to drop to 1-2, be looking up at 3-0 Wyoming. No, you have to go up to Wyoming still a month later. This is a game that I think they have to take care of at Moby. They're similar teams in the sense of the way that they, score, the way they share the basketball. They both get to the free throw line a pretty good amount of the time. They certainly are not the same in execution or tempo or the way they go about it. The Colorado State, a much more ambitious rebounding team than Wyoming is, especially at the offensive end of the court. So stylistically, they're a little bit different, but they have key players. They've got a couple of guards that can hurt you. They've got a big guy on each end, or two in Wyoming's case, that I think can hurt you. So I think it's going to be a very good game, but I think it's going to be maybe a tough spot for Wyoming. This might be one of the games that, if they drop it, it's not necessarily a demerit on the way to the 18-game run.
UNLV, fresh off dropping a game at Kansas, played very well at times during that game, had a lead in that game in the second half. This is an intriguing team. 9-5, 0-1 in conference play. They played well. They've been battle tested. Dave Rice has scheduled outside of conference play very well against Utah. They took on Kansas. They also beat Arizona. How much does that help a young team that's still building its team chemistry to go out there and play the who's who of college basketball as they get set to go into Mountain West play? How does that help them?
It's a delicate balance, and I think last year we talked about this. The schedule ate them alive. They scheduled ambitiously. It was too early. The team hadn't come together. They weren't ready for it, and suddenly they were, in essence, eliminated from at-large consideration by December. This year's team got a little bit fortunate that a couple of the games they didn't play very well in early, they at least won. You know, there's a huge difference between dumping a game or two, a guaranteed game at home, or getting away with a 2-point win. It looks better on the resume. People get a little bit more confidence. Okay, at least people aren't on us for that. Obviously, they beat Arizona. You know, Arizona has its own deficiencies, but you can't take anything away from that win. A huge quality win for UNLV, and a team that is improving. And I think that's what you wanted to see from a team with so many new faces. Obviously, Cody Doolin is experienced, but he's a first-year player at UNLV. You got Rashad Vaughn. You've got excuse me, Chris Wood, who's blossoming now in his second season there. Good luck Okanoba, a freshman that you're relying on to block shots and provide some rim presence. So I think the stuttering was expected, and I think this is a team that, had they had a better track record historically, and I don't mean this with a lot of disrespect to Dave Rice, but he's in prove-it mode now, as far as the ability to get through a Mountain West season and not dump games left and right that you shouldn't be losing. I think if they get the effort that they got, obviously against Arizona, but even against Kansas, you know, a performance, or the game that they lost at Wyoming in the league opener, the effort and quality of play was there. So don't worry about the result. Now, you got to go and take care of games like home against Nevada or at San Jose State, the games you need to win to get to where you need to be. I think this team is trending in the right direction, but there is a lot of show me right now to UNLV after the last couple of seasons.
San Diego State, another Mountain West team that was very ambitious in its non-conference scheduling. They're 11-4 at this point in the season, struggling to find a strong offensive presence. Only one player, Winston Shepard, averages in double figures as far as points go. How do they get more points, and is this sustainable? They play great defense. They always have. Is this sort of offensive output sustainable, or do they have to find someone to step into that?
No, I don't think the way they're producing right now is sustainable for a winning or championship team. Now without Dwayne Polee for the foreseeable future, we don't know what's going to happen with his health situation. They don't have a point guard. We talked about this in the preview video. You know, it's like, oh, they only lost one person. Well, they lost their point guard, who was carrying an enormous load of an offense for a team that last year was not particularly good offensively. Now you take that factor out, and you're playing a de facto shooting guard at point guard, or freshman at point guard, or, you know, I mean, Akil Quinn can step in. It is offensively, it's a mess right now. And you saw what happened when they simply, I mean, they let Air Force almost get them. And then they were down 19-3 or whatever it was at Fresno State, and never got all the way back in that game. And that's not a game that you should be losing. With all due respect to Fresno State, they've struggled without Cesar Guerrero. It's not, any game on the road in the Mountain West is not a gimme, but if you're going to compete for the championship in a year where even 4 or 5 losses might be enough to get you there, that's not a loss you want to take, and it's not a loss in the way that San Diego State took it that made me feel good about their chances, because they're not going to go to UNLV or to Laramie or to Colorado State or to New Mexico. I mean, I need to check the schedule, but you know what I'm saying. You go to the top half of the league and you can't score. That's not going to end well. So I'm a little concerned about San Diego State right now. The defense is going to keep them in a lot of games, but unfortunately for them, the offense is going to keep the other team in as many games for them.
San Diego State not the only team that's been hampered by injuries to a key player, with Dwayne Polee out for the foreseeable future. Another team, Cullen Neal, out at New Mexico for the season. And then at Boise State, Anthony Drimmick, he also out for the season. That certainly is going to hurt the Broncos. How much does it hurt this team? We saw the effects at Utah State. Against Utah State, I should say. The buzzer beater by David Collette really stung them. How much does that hurt Boise State without Drimmick, and how do they minimize that damage?
I don't know if you can. I mean, you lose, in my opinion, your best player. Clearly one of your 2 best players with Derek Marks. We had some reservations about Boise State at the beginning of the season. You know, I think, what did we call them? Like overrated or whatever
Something
it was.
Like that. Very eloquently.
Yeah, it was wonderful. They ended up second in the poll. You know, they could have been anywhere from 2nd to 5th. It was a team that, again, was missing some pieces. You had to go in and replace Orion Watkins and figure out how that was going to work. You had to see if you had enough offense and how that worked between Drimmick and Marks. You know, they're a decent team. But when you take a piece out like that, or you take a piece out like Cullen Neal, obviously New Mexico had a very good performance on the weekend, but over the course of 18 games in league play, not having Cullen Neal is going to be a big problem for them. You know, Hugh Greenwood is terrific, and they have other players. Deshaun Delaney is stepping up. They've got other guys that are pitching in here and there, but it's a limited team by New Mexico standards. And Boise State now is a limited team by the Boise State standards of the last 2 or 3 years. And that goes back to when we're talking about the window of opportunity here for a team that's healthy like Wyoming. You're looking around, San Diego State can't score. Colorado State has some deficiencies. You know, Boise State is frankly not a factor for the title at this point. New Mexico is still in prove-it mode. Where are you looking around for your other contenders? I mean, if UNLV puts it together, okay. But, you know, you look around and it's like, you stay healthy, man. You know, that's the key right now. Everybody else has lost big bodies, important players for their team. If you're Wyoming, you got to be looking around at this opportunity and say, you know what? If we can get this Colorado State game, our schedule the next few weeks is very home-loaded against other teams that are in top contention for the league title. They can get out ahead of this, and then people are trying to reel you in, and that's not easy. You know, if you're 2 or 3 games ahead of the pack, that's a huge buffer.
So we have a 15-game sample size, give or take, on each team, a couple of games in Mountain West play. Obviously, everyone's gunning for March. Everyone wants to get to the NCAA tournament. There's a lot of shuffling near the top. Who are the teams at this point that you see that would be in NCAA tournament?
Well, you know, Colorado State's going to be an interesting case. You know, you mentioned the Great Alaska Shootout. They have beaten some teams that are actually pretty credible that the public would not perceive as pretty good wins. And even though Colorado has struggled a little bit, that's a terrific road win for them. They beat some other teams at home that have better RPIs or profiles than maybe the national perception of it is going to be. So it feeds into Colorado State being 15th or 16th in the RPI when all other metrics say they're not a top 50 team. Now, you know, obviously there's a long way to go, but when you look at a situation like that, how is the NCAA Tournament Committee going to look at a team like that? Colorado State, by all rights, should win 24 or 25 games, you'd think, if they stay relatively healthy. I think that would be enough to get them in, but there's going to be a pretty sizable disparity, and the way that the Mountain West played in non-conference play overall, there's not a ton of high-quality wins. You're not getting top 25 wins in the league this year. So it's going to be more of an accumulator profile, and it'll be interesting. But to get back to the main question, you know, San Diego State and Colorado State would, I would imagine, be in at this point. And then obviously you have an automatic bid that's available. So, you know, you could get a third team in that way. You know, if Wyoming finishes in the top 2 and they only lost games, you know, at Cal and at SMU in non-conference play, you know, and they get in as a co-champion, yeah, I think there's a way to play their way in, but the way the league performed in non-conference play, I think I had said in the preview video 3, maybe 4. I think we have to downgrade that a little bit. I think the league should expect 2. I think there's a real shot at 3 depending on how things play out. Anything more than that is probably, I don't want to say out of reach, but that might be unlikely at this point.
Certainly very fluid, so we'll revisit this topic each and every week here in the Mountain West Network studio. Andy Glockner, give him a follow on Twitter. Great follow, @Andy Glockner. For Andy, I'm Jesse Kurtz. Thanks for logging on to the Mountain West Network.